Hi, I'm Liz Anelli. I'm a children's book illustrator. I've had great pleasure in making the pictures for lots of different picture books over the years. And today I'm going to read through Desert Lake, the story of Lake Eyre, Lake Kati Thanda, written by Pamela Freeman and illustrated by me. And then after reading some of the pages, I'm going to show you some techniques of how I made the illustrations for this book and show you some ways that you can make your own camouflaged insects using the kind of paints and bits and bobs that you've got lying around at home. This story is written in two parts. It's got the lovely lyrical poetic story that flows through, but also at the bottom of the page there is a dual text which explains lots of facts about the creatures and the environment of Lake Eyre. I'm just going to read a few pages for you today. Under the vast blue desert sky, the dry bed of Kati Thanda-Lake Eyre stretches to the horizon, blinding white with the salt of an ancient sea. The lake looks dead, but it's not. Beneath the salt crust, frogs are safe in deep burrows, their heartbeats so slow no one would know they are alive. Far up north, clouds are gathering, thunderheads and rain clouds. Rain falls. Rivers fill and break their banks. The water swirls and roars down the empty riverbeds towards the lake. Basking in a billabong, a surprised fish is swept up in the flood and surges down the channel, tumbling and leaping as the wave carries it out onto the dry salt lake. The water touches a buried frog. It wakes, blinking sleepy golden eyes at the newly wet world. Nearby, frogs' eggs laid years ago for this very moment float to the top of the new lake and hatch. Tadpoles wriggle away as fast as they can before the hungry gobbies snap them up. Far, far away, pelicans lift into the sky, hundreds of them, heading for the lake to nest. Their huge wings speed them across the great red desert to the one spot where their babies will be safe from dingoes and foxes, the new islands in the middle of the lake. Here's a spread right at the back of the book. This is moonlight over the dry salt lake when the water has dried up again. And you can see that this book is about vastness, but also about detail, about patterns and camouflage. Going to Lake Eyre myself to research the book, I was very impressed on how well the creatures, the insects, the small animals manage to camouflage themselves, and also how sometimes all you see of them is those tracks that they leave in the sand. If I go to the end papers, with printmaking, I've made a piece of artwork that resembles the tracks in the sand. And as you can see, sometimes there's a bit of a scuffle going on, where maybe something attacked something else, or perhaps they were dancing and having a party. And occasionally you have that lovely thing where just one dry stalk of grass will just drag on the surface of the sand in the wind. As well as you go through the book, there's an index and a little bit of information about Kati Thanda-Lake Eyre, the last few pages, that describes how the lake came to be and where it's situated. And look, another of my maps. Desert Lake is all about detail and finding those tiny little insects and creatures and plants that live in, well, just in your backyard. A lot of the research for this book I did by going to Lake Eyre, Lake Kati Thanda in the middle of South Australia, but I also spent a lot of time with a magnifying glass in my own backyard, looking at the plants that grew there, looking at, I've got a little bottle here full of dirt out of my backyard, and looking to see if I could find insects and following them and seeing what they did and watching to see looking at how well they were camouflaged against the little environment that they inhabited. So I don't know if you've got a magnifying glass at home and you could spend a bit of time in your own backyard just having a scout about, seeing what's there, what colours and patterns and designs. Don't go poking your fingers in anything nasty and bitey. So this book here, Desert Lake, again, that was what you call a multimedia book. I used painting and collage, and I used my computer and photographs I'd taken, all sorts of things combined together to make the colourful patterned artwork that is Desert Lake. So I'm going to show you a little bit about how I made some of the elements here on my paper, and hopefully you can collect the same kind of materials at home and have a go yourselves. So I've got a whole heap of stuff on my table this time. I've got some things I found from outside, I've got some paints, I've got a stack of magazines, I've got one of these print stamp pads that's got ink inside, and a few things that I've collected. Some are actual stamps and some are just things I found around the house that you can dip into ink. Bit of cardboard, bit of old packaging, all sorts of things. So let's get started with the painty stuff first, because that needs to dry. I collect, if anyone's ever got any old glossy magazines, I love using these because one, they're beautiful bright colours, and two, their glossiness really helps me for what I'm going to do now, the technique I'm going to show you. So I want a page, doesn't matter what it's of, take it at random, a page with some bright colours on, and I want some paint. And again, I'm not actually really painting using a fine paintbrush, I'm just putting paint onto something and moving it around. Doesn't matter at all what the picture's of, because you're not going to use the picture, you're going to use the colours. So there, I've got a bit of red, and I've got a bit of yellow, sploop, and I sort of splodge them together so they kind of make orange. And then this, now you can use a plastic fork, but I found this beautiful, it's a spreader, a glue spreader for when you're putting tiles onto a wall, like your splashback, and it's got a little grated edge there, and it's really good. Oh, look at that. You see how I'm dragging it across the paper? And because the paper's already coloured, it makes a most amazing pattern colour. Can you see the picture of the woman is almost gone now? All you can see is bits of colour coming out from underneath. So just experiment with different colours. Put a bit of paint on, kind of thick paint. Watercolour paint won't work for this. It's got to be something that they call body paint, maybe thick poster paint or acrylic. When the paint's nice and wet, just wiggle. You could do straight lines or you could do wiggly lines. You can spread a bit of the paint out. You can have straight lines. You can use the tooth butt, or you can put some paint on and then just squiggle into it with the point. Could be a point of a pencil as well. You can make all sorts of marks. And can you see the contrast between the lovely glossy magazine colour and the paint colour that I've put on over the top? And now really you need this to be let to dry. Otherwise you're going to get a little bit messy. Oh look, if you go one way and the other way, you get an amazing grid pattern. That is so pretty. No end of, this is what I call rainy day experimenting. No end of things you can do with that. I've got my painty stuff and it's really soggy and wet, so I'm going to leave it alone for a minute and make the background. And I'm going to make a tree for a little insect to flit amongst. And for this I'm going to use my stamp pad. Now I have got a rough piece of, this is old packing styrofoam, and you see how it makes a lovely tree trunk. Look at that. I couldn't have drawn that in a million years. I'm just pushing it into the ink and making a trunk. Now this is fine for the trunk, isn't it? But what am I going to do when I get to the branches, which are thinner? Well, I'm going to take a sheet of paper. Now this works best on really cheap thin butcher's paper. So don't go using expensive thick paper because it needs fine paper to pick up the texture. So there I'm masking off the areas that I don't want to be printed, and then I'm doing the same thing that I did before, but it can't print where there's a bit of torn off paper. So here's one branch, and branches are very irregular in shape and feel. That's why I haven't, maybe change this one a little bit, that's why I haven't cut it with a pair of scissors. I've just torn it with my hands. There we go. Maybe it splits in two here. Now we might want some leaves, so I could find another sheet of magazine and I'm going to cut the leaves out. I could find bits of foliage, say it was a gardening magazine, But you know, it's kind of, it would look a bit odd because it would look like it was a picture of one thing trying to fit onto your picture. So I just find things that are green. Some leaves are actually one colour on one side and a different colour underneath, and some it's just the pattern of the way the sunlight falls on the tree. I might not stick these down straight away. I might just place them on the paper so that I can think a little bit more about where I want everything. Now I'm going to go back to my stamp pad for the next thing. I've got lots of different things in here. One of them is, this is something you use in building. I think if you want to put screws into a wall, suddenly when you press it into the ink it becomes a pair of eyes. What is this here? Piece of cardboard. What are you going to do with a piece of cardboard? Well, you know, cardboard's made up of 2 layers with a bit in between, a concertina bit. It's a nice pattern, that. You dip that into a thing of ink and it looks a little bit like the hairy antennae or legs of an insect. Okay, it's got eyes, it's got legs, hasn't got a body. Well, that's where what we did earlier comes in. So this should be dry by now. Oh look, haha, I did that. Here's one I made earlier. Here's a little bit of pattern I made earlier, because that is very soggy still. Find a bit that you like, contrasting colours, and just snip it into the shape of your insect's body, and that's going to sit just there. Something else I could use is, this is dressmaker's pattern. In Desert Lake I used this a lot in the background. What I did is I scrunched it up and then unfolded it and cut little shapes out that I wanted, and then glued them down in a slightly scrunched up shape. So it looks a bit messy. Now I happen to know that insects are the same both sides, they're symmetrical, so I should do one the other side. Now that looks really messy until you put something over the top of it. So I could just dab some paint on. Really, I need it a little bit. Something else I could make wings out of is, this one's an old sweet wrapper that I've had for ages and ages. Now again, I know that insects' wings are probably going to be symmetrical, so I folded the piece of paper over and cut the shape once, but as it's folded, look, I get 2. You could even go 3-dimensional here and build it up. So that's the top set of wings. That's one of my little creatures. But I don't need to stop there, do I? I've got a whole tree to work with. I could find, I've got all sorts of shapes. What's this? Pencil sharpener. And big dice. If you keep printing it time and time again, do you think this looks like a rather big, creepy caterpillar? Huge! Look at it in comparison to the bug. Maybe it's a very small bug. I've been in Australia a little while now, and I have noticed that a lot of things have a bit of a sting in their tail, and it might have, oh, I could use the cardboard again for some antennae. And also, if it's got a body this long, it's going to need a lot of legs, isn't it? So there we go. 1 pair for every one of those segments. You can add some little bits of drawing, some details of drawing, like eyeballs and things like that. And then, of course, you could do a lovely painted sky behind. You could add more leaves, you could add some birds and more insects. So here we go. What did I use? Some glue. Didn't even use the scissors very much. Some magazines, some paint, things that you can dip into ink, and some ink or some thick paint that you might have hanging around the house. And your imagination, that's the big one, isn't it? So there you go. Make yourself some printy, painty creatures that are climbing up a tree.